What does IOP Publishing do, or what does IOP the Society do with publishing art? Well, we take money and we put it back into physics. We consider ourselves a partner in research. We're not people extracting money from science, from research. It's very important for us to put that money back into the community. We want research to continue. We want interest in physics to grow. And we see ourselves as a very active participant in that process. IOP produces Lab and Lori. This is basically a lab in a truck that drives around for high school students. And profits that we make off the journals go to do that. So it's a good life cycle for academic publishing. We also support women in physics, trying to bridge the gender gap. And we also give grant aid to developing countries in Africa. We work as policymakers and advocates on behalf of physics, the field, as well as education. And all of these values feed through into IOP Publishing, which is the branch that we work for. So as I said, IOP Publishing is based in Bristol. We have about 70 academic journals and magazines, a number of community websites. We do education publishing, again, mainly around physics. And various branches of physics. We have about 30 partners, so it's a bit of a complicated relationship. So we own about half of the journals that we publish, but we also publish on behalf of partners. In the bio, we mentioned that I work on the American Astronomical Society journals, and they are one of our larger partners, and we'll be seeing some things that we've done for them a little bit later. So you're probably wondering why I'm going through all of this before I actually talk about article level metrics. And the reason that I'm doing that is because article level metrics are very different from something like an impact factor. They're customizable, and this is great. But when you're a publisher that represents a number of different competing interests, this is hard, or it can be hard. Let's see. Sorry, I'm not really doing terribly well. Right, okay. So, as I said before, we have 30 partners, and we have broad subject reach. We go from astronomy and astrophysics, nanotechnology, medical physics. We have things from the Journal of Breath Research to the Astrophysical Journal. And if you can imagine what a community in the Journal of Breath Research finds interesting is probably not a huge Venn diagram between them and astronomy and astrophysics, except for their physics. We designed and built our own content hosting platform. We just released a new version of that. It's called Article Evolution. And the reason that I raised that is because we had to have a way of being able to respond to our different communities. We have, as I said, breath researchers, and we have astrophysicists, and they all have to be able to interact meaningfully with this platform. And in order for us to be able to do that, we had to be able to adapt very quickly to the needs of the different communities. So what an astrophysicist wants, can we provide that while we simultaneously provide what a breath researcher wants? And for a society publisher as small as IOP is, it's not quite as trivial as doing something like what Highwire or Adipon do. So we had to be very clever in how we built our architecture and how we decided to actually present information. So very quickly, what are article level metrics? They're based on the article, they're not based on the journal. So some of the criticism that you get, and what a lot of people in this room probably already know, is that many articles that are contained in journals with high impact factors actually have very little citations that have anything to do with the impact factor. If you look at the bell curve, it's highly skewed towards citations towards the high end. There's very few of them. They make a very big impact, and I'll show an example of that for the AAS titles in just a moment. The measures can, the article impact factors can, the article level metrics can vary by publisher, and what can be really tricky about that is that publishers can decide to define different metrics the same way. So essentially, you can say, well, a download to me equals all of the times that someone's downloaded a PDF or an HTML article. But a download to someone else, say PLOS, for example, could be every time someone takes the PMC article, sometimes taking the HTML, the PDF, or the XML. And so they don't necessarily equate to the same things. And so it's a little bit difficult to look and say, well, this download equates to that download. that's not a reason not to use the material, right? I mean, I think the more important lesson here is that it's important to have transparency on what these metrics mean, how you derive them, what's useful, and how that use is relevant to the community that you're providing that information to. It's just another tool. And like all tools, you have to understand what it's doing, how it's doing it, and how to use it properly to be able to actually take full advantage of it. So in 2009, PLOS rolled out their article level metrics. Many publishers are offering some version of article level metrics. You see downloads, you see citations, you see ISI downloads, you see cross-ref citations, reads and Mendeley, all sorts of different things. And those are appropriate for the communities that they serve. In the scholarly context, article level metrics can be really controversial. Some people look at these as, well, it's a popularity contest. It's really a metric of how well you promote your research or how well you're known, not necessarily what the value of the material is judged by that metric. And I would argue that that's not actually the case. Perhaps it's not getting the scholarly impact that some people are assuming that download means, but maybe what it is providing is an indicator of interest to the public. And by that indicator of interest, maybe what we're saying here is that there's something valuable here, and a funder, for example, could be aware of what they've contributed to that article and that it has actually achieved its goal, whether it's achieved citation or not. If you think about methods papers, not generally cited as much because they are used, right? You look at it, if it's been downloaded then and it's been adopted, that's success. Success actually isn't a citation to that paper. People's skepticism about this actually reminds me of a quote, and I thought I would put it up here, it amuses me. Figures often beguile me, particularly when I have the arranging of them myself, in which case the remark attributed to Disraeli would often apply with justice and force. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. I think most of us have heard that. Disraeli, actually, it's pretty well understood, was not the person who actually said that, but that's for another day. It's still an argument. So why are we doing article level metrics? Why did IOP decide to do this? As I said, part of our ethos is being part of the community. And being part of the community is enabling our researchers to take a very active role in scholarship. And providing article level metrics gives them another tool by which to measure their effectiveness and their impact in the community. Researchers are increasingly having to give information about their impact, and they're having to give it with less and less time. Many of them can't wait for an ISI impact factor or for citations to come running in. They have to be able to demonstrate that they've got impact in a different way. As Jason talked about, this is very similar to ImpactStory, right? You have to be able to relate to the world that what you are doing is relevant, is useful, is worthy of publishing, and is out there and is being used. Social bookmarking, such as, or usage such as bookmarking and sharing, are more immediate than citations. Downloads are even more immediate. There are questions about, well, how useful is a download? One thing I had suggested earlier about downloads is, well, our peer-reviewed databases have a pretty reasonable idea of where good research comes from and what fields. We could mesh that together with the downloads based on the IPs, knowing where they are, and say, well, hey, of all of these downloads, 90% of them went to institutions that had excellent research in X field. Map that onto a mesh term, for example, something along those lines. And you could actually turn that into a very useful statistic. The problem, of course, is that this is then not a standard statistic. This is something that provides usage, but not necessarily something that you can compare against. And so you have to have a very transparent way of presenting the data and explaining to your communities how it's being used and what that usage means. You know, does a download actually translate something useful to the person who thinks they're reading it? Does it mean what they think it means? Another option to use this is for a method of discovery. For example, if we show what papers via Mendeley are being linked together, what are being shared by a particular, or read or stored by a particular scholar, by looking at what that scholar stores, A, you're discovering content yourself, B, you're discovering other scholars that that scholar is related to, and growing your network. So it's a discovery route to related content and scientists. Artlevel metrics on IOP science. In the spring of 2012, we commissioned a survey of board members for our journal's editorial boards about Artlevel metrics. We were trying to make a decision whether we wanted to do this and should we do it. Of the survey, we had 156 responses, which is really good. That was a pretty high response rate. And we got some pretty interesting results. 86 respondents were in favor of displaying article-level metrics. It was much higher than we had expected it to be. What we also found out, I'm sorry, it's not actually on the slide, they were also very interested in seeing citations. 74% were interested in seeing downloads, but only 13% were actually interested in seeing bookmarking sites like Site You Like or Mendeley. And the reason that they claim this, or they said this, and it's particularly true for astronomy, is that not all of these sites actually give real meaning, right? A particular community may not use a particular service, and so just displaying that there is no usage implies something that actually isn't true. 39% of respondents said that they wanted to see metrics related to blogs or news postings. So again, not a particularly strong interest in that at all. Something that I particularly like, less than 10% of respondents felt that it should be up to the author whether to display the article level metrics or not. And I like that. I like that they say, well, right, let the chips fall where they may. Right? It's important to have that transparency and show what the effect of this material is, whether it's excellent, whether it's not. So, obviously, given the response, we decided, yeah, this makes a lot of sense for us. We'll go ahead and do it. And so our first attempt was simply producing downloads, and that's what we've got on the site right now. We ask, sorry, let me qualify that. After I've just said that downloads can mean all sorts of things. Downloads to us means successful delivery of the content. We clean it up by a counter 3 in spirit, although of course you can't necessarily say that's the case, considering it's not an institution. We constantly monitor this. We look to include more robots to try and filter out all of the junk, if you will, the meaningless downloads. So we included that. We also asked the community and said, well, what are you looking for? What do you need? Because as I said before, we've got a number of different communities, and all of them have different needs and different desires out of article-level metrics, and some of them have the desire for it to go away, which is also very interesting. So at the moment, we have citations, so Crossref, PubMed Central where appropriate, which seems odd as a physics publisher, I have to say, Nature Blogs, and Google Scholar. That list itself actually is really interesting. It highlights a couple problems that people may not necessarily think about when they're thinking about our article-level metrics. PubMed Central doesn't scrub their data against the same list that we scrub our data against. So they have a list of robots that they ignore, but that doesn't actually match the list of robots we ignore. Ours is much more extensive. So in fact, they're giving us inflated statistics. Well, you know, technically, yay, that makes it look like there's more usage than there actually is. But that's not in the spirit of what we're trying to do. And so it can be a little bit confusing when we try and aggregate what a download is across multiple sites. And we'll look at that in a minute as well. Bookmarks and share services, we use Site You Like, Mendeley, and used to use Conatia. And that brings up another interesting problem. When you have third party, when your website relies on a third party to provide information, you're at the mercy of that third party. You know, is their server alive? If it doesn't respond and your web server says no citations, is that actually true? And the end user may or may not know. And that can be embarrassing. We'll see an example of that in a minute. And then we have something which is a customized article level metric for us, and that's the video abstract views. These are one of our journals, the open access journal, the new Journal of Physics, actually allows authors or encourages authors to submit video abstracts. So these are where the authors, the lead author, will sit down and talk about their paper. It's an accessible version of the paper, generally speaking, usually about 2 minutes. It is peer-reviewed, so it's got to have a certain level of relevance and utility to the article. But it does go all over the map. You have the elderly professor sitting on a table with an iPhone, probably taking him or filming him while he's writing on a whiteboard. And you've got the highly produced, well-funded press offices producing the videos as well. But it's interesting to see how those video abstracts actually relate to the impact of the article. It's amazing how many people, how many downloads those videos get. And with those videos, we can actually tell, well, did they actually watch the whole video? So we know, was it a version of a click versus was there staying power? And so we can actually feed back and say, right, this is a good thing. You did well here. Do more of that or don't. Right? So here's an example of a paper near and dear to my heart. It's from a survey, the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe. In astronomy and astrophysics, this is basically gold. And this is published in one of our journals, the Astrophysical Journal Supplements. According to ISI, this is the highest rated paper, highest cited paper in our impact factor year in 2011. And it was responsible for 497 citations. You can see we have a metrics tab on the landing page, and we also have sort of teaser metrics there at the bottom. I put arrows on. I appreciate the screen is probably too small for most people to see these numbers. The purpose behind this was to sort of expose the fact that metrics are there, and some people really are only interested in one metric. I want to see the downloads. And so this was a quick way of getting people to the information they wanted to see, but also showing them that they're able to get data in a more robust fashion in a different place. We also have placeholders on the full text articles as well, so people are aware that this functionality exists. When you click on the metrics tab, you get a listing of all of the metrics that we provide. And this can be a pitfall, and we'll see that in just a second. So the total downloads, 4,602. It's pretty good. For every 10 downloads, we're getting a citation. Crossref, 2,423 citations. That doesn't seem to match the citations that we're getting from ISI. How does that work? Google, which I think everybody else has this experience as well. When we link out to Google Scholar, essentially what happens is we take you to a page and Google then shows you citations. They don't provide via API any way for us to access the information. Site you like, we've got 20 bookmarks. It seems a little bit low considering this is a journal article that is literally the most important one in all of the journal. You see that there are no results for Mendeley. No, actually, you guys probably don't see that. The text says results for Mendeley are currently unavailable for this article, which is our response when there's either 0 or Mendeley is down. And you'll also notice that the results for Conatia are currently unavailable for this article. Well, yes, they are, and won't come back. And so that's another problem of your third-party incorporation of materials onto your site. We've now got to write software to get this out of there, which is on the next software build. Thank you. Instead of just looking at the article on IOP Science, I went and looked at the NASA Astrophysics Data System. This is the abstracting and indexing service for astronomy and astrophysics, and it's very unique. In astronomy and astrophysics, all of the major players submit all of their metadata to this service. They have an excellent view on all of the materials that are there. Our search engine has almost no hits to it because everybody goes here. We talk about what our priorities are for our platform, and I always say, search, I couldn't care less if I could take it off as far as I care. Which, of course, I'm the only publisher within the organization that says that, thank God. You'll notice that the citations to the article, wow, Alberto claims it's 3,497. Well, it doesn't match either one of them. He's also claiming significantly higher reads, and the way that he can do this is that ADS actually points to the journal article, and so he traps each time someone clicks and gets sent off to the full text, whether it be PDF or whether it be HTML. What he's also doing is counting reads of archive. So he knows when the article was on archive, and he knows when the article went to us. But when he's putting his total reads down, he's saying, well, the archive version and the published version, the final published version, they're the same thing. But we all know they're not. But he doesn't care. So this is one of those gotcha moments, because if a researcher is now trying to look at what we're presenting as article level metrics, and then trying to cross-compare, they're trying to validate against another service, such as ADS, well, these numbers don't match, so where's the validity? And this goes back to the need to have a page that talks about how your article, how your metrics are sourced, truly what they mean, and what the limitations of interpreting those metrics are. And so we do have such a page. I did not put it here, but please feel free to visit our site, iotScience.org, and you can find out all sorts of information about our article level metrics. Here's another interesting case. This paper was published in the New Journal of Physics, and we actually have a lot of fun research going on at the moment about invisibility cloaks. Very cool stuff. But the problem is in physics, when we talk about invisibility cloaks, we mean a few molecules, really. You know, we're not talking about James Bond's car, we're not talking about Harry Potter, although we did use Harry Potter describing one of the articles. You can see what this does to the downloads, to what happens when we mention this. It got picked up by BBC. They said, oh, scientists are on the cusp of discovering how to make things invisible. And so every kid on the planet apparently said, that's awesome, let me check it out. And so 24,376 downloads. This article is just over a year old. That's not bad. But then you look at the cross-ref citations and you see, well, there's 14. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Cite you like, there's 6. It's not Mendeley, again. So how much value is there? And we do talk about this on our page. You have to be very careful that you're not putting your idea of what an article level metric is. You're not superimposing that belief on what is actually being presented. Much like the spirit of PLOS, we're putting the data out there because we find that the data is useful, it does have meaning, but we caution people not to put their own idea of what that meaning is. We tell them very specifically what the meaning is. But it's really tempting to say, I got 24,376 downloads. So results. Since implementation, the usage of the metrics tab has gone up by double-digit percentage as a percentage of total page requests. So as I'm sure every publisher here that monitors their site knows, some months are better months than others. But we have consistently gone up in double-digit requests for this information, which is really good to see. The community, disappointingly, we're not getting a lot of substantive feedback. People say they want it, people say they need it, but people don't come back and say, right, well, we'd like this other piece of information to be included, or you need to be a little bit more wary of how you count your downloads. We've really not gotten a lot of feedback. We will after we have a little bit more data under our belt to a proper survey of this. Disciplines and communities within disciplines, not may, do react very differently to the presentation of the same data. Within physics, we've got people who look at this and think this is amazing, this is good work, thank you very much, particularly the open access journals. But we also have partners who say that is not to appear on our article ever, ever, ever under pain of death. And it's interesting because it doesn't correlate to subject area necessarily. Sometimes partners, the AAS in particular, say they don't like the idea of a vanity game. They don't like the idea of saying that something is important simply because it's gotten a lot of downloads, and they don't like the implication. They allow it to be there, but they point very heavily to the point that these should be taken with a grain of salt unless you really understand the data that you're looking at. And that's really all I had to talk about biology.